You probably met a lot of people you thought were idiots for any number of reasons. It could be a schoolmate that struggled to pass classes that you found easy, a friend that made impulsive and foolish decisions, or literally every person on the highway that's driving slower than you. But what if it didn't have to be that way? What if people could be genetically engineered before birth to be as intelligent as possible? This question is often framed as what if everyone had an IQ of 200, but that's actually not possible. IQ scores are ranked on a bell curve, so even if everybody was a super genius, that level of intelligence would just represent the new score of 100. And if that sounds like needlessly semantic, actually bullshit to you, keep in mind that the quality of pedantic interjections like that is exactly what a hypothetical future would hold. We can't magically make everybody that's already alive smarter, but science promises us that genetically modifying embryos to select traits will be available in our near future. For our purposes, let's say that in the year 2030, gene editing to maximize intelligence is not only fully realized technology, but is universally adopted by all parents everywhere. Would it even make a difference? How scientifically possible is this? And what effects would it have on society as a whole? Well, let's find out. Now, certain human traits are purely genetic, such as eye color and ear shape. There are no environmental factors or parenting choices that can affect those things. But when it comes to things like our personality and intelligence, that's a bit more of an open question. How much of it is genetic and how much of it is a product of someone's upbringing? One of the earliest studies designed to shed some light on this matter was Sir Cyril Bert's twin studies. His results showed exactly what we in modern day would expect. Identical twins, those with identical DNA, had much more similar IQ scores than fraternal twins, who would share about 50% of their DNA on average. Biological siblings also had a much higher correlation between IQ scores than adopted siblings. Each set of siblings were raised in the same environment by the same parents who hopefully loved them equally, thus minimizing the impact of environmental factors. It showed strong evidence that intelligence had at least some genetic components, and the more DNA two siblings shared, the more similar their IQ scores would be. Of course, Bert burned all of his research before he died, and has since faced allegations that much of his data was falsified. Luckily, future studies produced nearly identical results to his, so it's quite possible that Bert was just a careless researcher rather than someone intentionally trying to commit fraud. Now, this was the first major study on the topic of nature versus nurture, but there have since been many more. While research remains ongoing, the prevailing opinion is that both genetics and environment play a role, but the genetics is responsible for as much as 80% of a person's intelligence. Essentially, you have a genetic potential for intelligence that can be raised and lowered by environmental factors, but mostly just lowered. The only factor shown to increase a person's IQ score is education. For every year of education, a person's IQ was shown to increase by 1 to 5 points. This is pretty intuitive, as a person who never learns anything isn't going to be any smarter at 15 than they were at 5. If nothing else, a formal education can give someone more familiarity with the style of questions that might appear in an IQ test. Beyond that, there are a lot of environmental factors that can lower a person's IQ score. Malnutrition's a major factor, especially at younger ages. Children who suffered malnutrition between the ages of 1 and 5 had IQ scores reduced by as much as 15 points. The quality of a person's home life also affected their IQ scores. Children who received encouragement and constructive feedback showed improvement in their scores as they grew up, though this is essentially just another form of education, so it's not that surprising. However, children that were faced with constant negative and corporal punishment suffered reduced IQ scores. Socioeconomic status also plays a role, with those suffering from poverty or financial instability having lower average scores. Now, comparing the IQs of 2-year-old children born into both impoverished and wealthy households showed an average difference of 6 points. However, by the time those kids were 16, the gap had tripled, showing that economic factors cause a continuing decline in people reaching the full potential of their intelligence. Genetically engineering children to be as intelligent as possible isn't a guaranteed solution, since environment plays a role, but since genetics are dramatically more responsible, it should still have a large effect. So, is genetic engineering intelligence actually even possible? Now, some scientists claim that within 10 years we'll be able to genetically engineer babies to have specific traits like increased intelligence, but this does seem, well, a touch optimistic. Major advancements are being made constantly in genetic engineering, but we aren't yet at the point where parents can design their baby from the ground up. Thus far, the best you can hope to do is remove genetic diseases and select your baby's eye color. However, this isn't actually done through the use of gene splicing. When parents choose to conceive using in vitro fertilization, the embryos are subjected to pre-implantation genetic testing. This allows the doctors to check the embryo's DNA to see if it is carrying any major genetic disorder or birth defect. If so, the embryo is discarded and a different one is chosen for implantation. While not extremely common yet, during this phase, there are certain companies that will also let parents select their child's eye color. The parents are first tested to make sure they have the necessary genes to create a baby with that eye color, and there's no guarantee that any of the embryos will carry those genes, but if so, that embryo is the one that will be selected. If none of the embryos were the desired color, then the parents are told too bad, and they get what they get. And we're not yet at the point where even something like engineering an eye color is possible. In fact, we're probably a lot further away than we thought we were a few years ago. It was long stated that there were 16 different genes that were responsible for a person's eye color. These genes were also responsible for other things, so modifying them could have unintended consequences, and the more genes involved, the more difficult it is to alter the DNA sequence without errors. If it was only 16 genes, this might have been doable. However, in 2021, researchers discovered that there are at least 50 additional genes responsible for a person's eye color. That's a lot of gene editing just to guarantee one simple trait. If the parents aren't picky about the exact shade of their chosen color, they could probably get away with only editing the OCA2 gene, which is responsible for 75% of a person's eye color, but it's still not guaranteed. Unsurprisingly, intelligence is a lot trickier. There isn't a single gene like the OCA2 that makes up the majority of a person's genetic capabilities or intellect. Thus far, every gene found that influences a person's intelligence has only a tiny effect, and there are a lot of them. While the human genome has 3.2 billion base pairs of DNA, these make up only about 20 to 25,000 total genes. And thus far, over 1,000 of those genes have been identified as playing a role in a person's intelligence. To genetically modify a human embryo for improved intelligence, we would have to edit 5% or more of their genes. This would carry a very high risk of mistakes or unintended consequences, and it's unlikely that governing bodies would allow this level of gene manipulation in the foreseeable future. But let's assume for a moment that all of the genes affecting intelligence were identified. They could be edited with perfect accuracy, and every government and society was completely on board with this plan. Which sounds super likely, doesn't it? And so, what would the world look like if everyone was smart like you? So, it's important to note that everything here is speculation. We do that often in this channel. We can look at research and statistics regarding highly intelligent people to make some reasonable predictions, but it is, of course, impossible to say for sure what will happen. However, we can tell you some things that will definitely not happen. There are a lot of wild and pretty baseless claims that are often repeated regarding a world where everybody suddenly became brilliant. Within a year, cancer would be cured, humans would be colonizing Mars within the decade, and all religion would die off almost immediately. And absolutely none of those are actually true. Things like curing cancer is extremely complex. Surprise! And the problem certainly isn't that the people working on it are just not brainy enough. The number one risk factor for cancer isn't smoking, tanning beds, or radiation. It's aging. A super intelligent society may be more able to effectively treat cancer, but to actually cure cancer, we would essentially need to cure our bodies of aging. And that's not something we're likely to figure out in a year, is it? No matter how brainy we are. As for religion, the correlation between high intelligence and lack of belief in religion is actually a lot lower than many people believe. With each subsequent generation in our new high IQ society, we could expect to see a reduction in the number of people with religious beliefs, but it's not going to be an instantaneous end to religion, if it ever ends at all. And the same is true with various forms of bigotry, as highly intelligent people tend to be more socially liberal. Again, this isn't a huge correlation, as it is often portrayed, but over time, society could see things like racism genuinely disappear. But what about some of the more immediate changes? The first smart generation is going to be a lot better looking than previous generations, as a study out of Harvard found a direct correlation between higher IQ scores and physical attractiveness. That's not to say that intelligent people are more likely to have symmetrical facial features or stronger jawlines, but they're less likely to be slovenly and unkempt. Looking bad can be a hindrance in job interviews or when trying to be invited to social events, so while a more intelligent society won't necessarily have more beautiful people, it will have just less bad-looking people. Another change that will manifest quickly is an increase in mental illness. People with higher IQs are more likely to suffer from depression, anxiety, and bipolar disorder. Fortunately, the amount of untreated mental illness is likely to decrease. Destigmatizing mental health treatment would be another effect of people being more socially liberal, something that would likely be accelerated by the increased prevalence of these conditions. By the second generation, when super-intelligent adults are raising super-intelligent children, we could start to see much larger changes. People with high IQs are more likely to be night owls, so With more people awake during the night, we could see a shift towards more of a 24-hour society. We could see more businesses open throughout the night, particularly those that offer services rather than just selling products that can be purchased online anyway. But this more nocturnal society may have an impact on education as well. The two main driving factors for whether someone is a morning person or a night owl are intelligence and age. School is generally scheduled around the adults, even though children, and especially adolescents, are shown to be more effective learners when school starts later in the day. If the adults no longer wanted to wake up early either, it could lead to an increase in the quality and speed of education. Even if the school start times don't change, education is going to be one of the most radically changed parts of our society. Now, you occasionally hear stories of some young teen or preteen that earned a college degree. Because highly intelligent people are able to learn more quickly, these stories would become the norm rather than outliers. Children would be earning their bachelor's degrees at 14 and doctorates by 18. In a way, this would almost be like going back to the education of the late medieval times, except instead of teenagers apprenticing to become a blacksmith or a cobbler, they would be conducting their medical residency or interning at a robotics lab. So, of course, having a lot of younger people in highly skilled or technical fields isn't necessarily a good thing. It's not necessarily bad either, but even if they had high IQs, they'd still be dumbass teenagers who were impulsive, immature, and lacked experience. While it would almost certainly be a net positive, it wouldn't be without its problems. But with more people capable of doing jobs requiring advanced education, there would be a large push towards automating as many unskilled jobs as possible. These jobs would be harder to fill, as nobody wants a boring and unfulfilling job, and everybody would be too highly qualified for them anyway. The other major areas of interest are crime and war. There's a strong chance that we would see a decrease in full-scale wars. Wars have a heavy cost, both in money and lives. They're generally high-risk and costly endeavors for minimal gains, and highly intelligent people may choose more rational diplomatic solutions. Or they could find a way to streamline war to be much more efficient and profitable for the winner, though this does seem rather less likely. With crime, it's much more difficult to predict what would happen. Based on statistics, it is often assumed that petty crimes and violent crimes would decrease while white-collar crimes would increase. But the data that these assumptions are based on is likely an example of correlation not equaling causation. Petty crime is more prevalent among people with lower IQs, but it's also more prevalent among people with a lower socioeconomic status. The latter is most likely the driving force, as crimes like mugging are generally done as a perceived matter of necessity. Since poor people would still exist, this need would not go away. One type of crime that would almost assuredly increase is illicit drug use. People with higher IQs are more prone to using drugs due to intellectual curiosity and the desire to experience new sensations. Then again, if illicit drug use became so widespread, society would probably just legalize all drugs anyway so that they could collect taxes on it. Despite the rampant drug use, it's possible that people might live longer and healthier lives as well. There is a very clear correlation between people with high IQ scores and people who live longer, though it's unclear how strong of a causal link that is. There is some causation, as intelligent people are less likely to become smokers, get in car accidents, or engage in other risky behaviors. However, some of it is less direct, like intelligent people having better jobs on average and thus better healthcare. Now, there are various other changes to society that we could speculate about, but it's important to remember that if everybody was intelligent, the world wouldn't suddenly become a utopia. Intelligence is just a small part of what makes a person who they are. Even if everybody had superintelligence, there would still be people that were just lazy, greedy, psychopathic, and just maybe completely immoral. Murderers and terrorists would all be extremely brilliant. But so would the investigators and counter-terrorism groups that tried to stop them. We can only guess as to which side would be more successful. But above all else, it's important to remember that a person's intelligence is merely a marker of what a person can do. It's been shown that environmental factors can lower these capabilities, but even if everyone had a high IQ, it just means that they are capable of learning quickly and applying knowledge and skills. Intelligence is in no way a marker of what a person will actually do, and there is evidence showing a strong correlation between high intelligence and laziness. Most importantly, the technology to make something like this possible is likely a very long ways in the future. If we actually wanted to see an increase in our intelligence within our lifetimes, we'd be better served by combating the factors that serve to lower people's IQs, like malnutrition and economic inequality. Of course, that would require people to work together and care about one another, so we'll probably just wait until scientists can solve the problem for us, right?